Who were the biggest winners of the 2025 Senior Bowl?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka the iron that sharpens the iron, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I think each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers, that means you make this illustrious pod your first listen each and every day. All you have to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today we are talking about the winners of the Senior Bowls. We'll not be doing the losers or anything like that, just because I don't really think anybody really lost. Certainly there were players that underperformed based off my expectations, but I wouldn't say that they were losers this week or whatever. And in full disclosure, guys, I did not attend day 3 of practice here in Mobile, Alabama. I'm coming from you from an undisclosed location at the epicenter of the Senior Bowl. But I did not attend day 3 because, much like Mike Green, much like Donovan Ezeiruaku, Shamar Stewart, and so many others, I left it all on the field, and I was just like, it's on to the next one. I did everything I needed to do during this week in Mobile, and I'm out on day 3. So because of that, won't have really many insights on sort of who stepped up, who performed or whatever on day 3, but we'll talk about sort of my winners and losers based off of those first 2 days of practice. And we'll talk about the edge rushers. We'll talk about the interior D linemen. We'll talk about the offensive line. It's all about trenches here on Locked On Falcons all week long, and we will continue that trend to wrap up the week. So first, starting with my winners at the edge rusher position, we got to talk about Mike Green out of Marshall. And, Mike Green is a player that, gets a lot of conversation in connection to the Atlanta Falcons, because there's a possibility that he could be the Falcons pick at that 15th overall selection in round 1. You have Daniel Jeremiah of NFL.com ranking Mike Green 23rd in his top 50 that dropped this past week. We'll wait and see what Dane Brugler does in his top 50 that will probably drop next week or at some point very soon. But if you look at Dane Brugler of the Athletics top 50 from November, he had Mike Green number 37, and I'm expecting Mike Green to come in higher than that ranking on Dane's next top 50 board. And, some people have speculated that Mike Green had such a good week in Mobile that, he's not even going to be there at 15, which I think is pretty silly at this point in time. It's a long off season. And people that sit here in late January and try to sort of suggest how the draft is going to go, I think is a fool's errand. And yet every year we still see people continuing to show themselves to be fools by talking about how the draft is going to go. So we'll see on that front. But why is Mike Green a winner? As I've mentioned many times on this pod over the last several days, I was skeptical of Mike Green going into this week, and I'm coming out of the week less skeptical of Mike Green. And for all the reasons we've talked about all week long, I wanted to see if he had a power element to his game. I wanted to see if he could consistently and reliably beat the higher quality offensive tackles that he is seeing here in Mobile than what he saw on a regular basis these last couple of years in the Sun Belt. And we saw Mike Green show that power element on Wednesday's practice in a viral clip where he basically decleated Oregon offensive tackle Josh Connolly Jr. on a bull rush. And I think he more than held his own against many of these Power 5 offensive tackles, including Connolly, and looked the part against them. And, maybe I'll still remain a little bit more skeptical of Mike Green than many others who are sort of penciling him as a lock top 10, top 15 sort of talent. Again, it's the beginning of this sort of pre-draft process, and we have 3 more months to kind of figure out where we ultimately land on Mike Green. But, I sit here on January 30th, not necessarily married to any sort of thing at this stage in the draft calendar. Basically, really, my opinion is going to only matter really on what it is on April 30th, right? And, it was going to continue and grow and evolve on these individuals, the Falcons, the draft, free agency, all that stuff is going to influence all of those things. We got the combine coming up next month, all those things. And so, to me, again, people, I see so many other people sort of planting a flag on a player for the Falcons at pick 15 at this stage in the calendar. And I just kind of scoff and go like, why do you do this every year? But, I want you guys to come a little closer, come closer, right? Speaking of Mike Green, he was probably like the fourth or fifth best edge on the national team in the 2 days of practice that I got to witness, right? In terms of who was the most impressive players in the one-on-ones at the edge rusher position, I think there were 4 players that were arguably better than Mike Green, despite all the buzz that Mike Green is going to get. And all 4 of those guys are winners in my book. Starting with Donovan Ezeiruaku of Boston College, Josiah Stewart of Michigan, David Walker of Central Arkansas, and Oluwafemi Oladejo of UCLA. I think all 4 of those guys arguably had better weeks than Mike Green, but you didn't hear that from me. Starting with Ezeiruaku, I think he had the best week of any edge rusher on that national team. He showcased a variety of moves, won with a variety of moves. Saw him win with a swipe, a bull rush, an inside swim, a cross chop. He's number 28 on Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. He's only 5 spots behind Mike Green. So he's arguably just as much in the conversation at number 15 as Mike Green is based off of that. And then you look at Josiah Stewart, what pass rush prospect, just quizzing you guys, had the highest pass rush win rate according to PFF this past year. It was Josiah Stewart of Michigan, right? And he's much more of a pure speed rusher, but he was consistently winning with that speed all week long. And, if you happen to be partial to guys that have that so-called fastball as pass rushers off the edge, and Josiah Stewart is going to be a guy that you're a big fan of. And you look at David Walker, it's kind of the opposite from Central Arkansas, right? He's much more of a power guy. And he was just going through guys all week long, and there's no questions about his ability to generate that power, unlike we had with Mike Green watching the film. And I've only dipped my toe into the Central Arkansas film because, it's kind of hard to come by, at this stage in the process. But what little I've seen of David Walker on the film, it showed out that power ability, absolutely showed out immediately. And like Green, you wanted to see how he handled making the jump from the FCS at Central Arkansas to some of these higher level, guys from more prominent schools and more bigger pedigree this week at the Senior Bowl. And David Walker made that jump, right? I'm just going to go through you. And that's the type of player that he is. And so I'm not saying he's at the same level as this prospect, but if you're looking at, what Jared Verse did with the Rams this past year and feeling very envious and want that type of pass rusher on your roster, I think you're going to like David Walker quite a bit in this pre-draft process. And talking about Oluwafemi Oladejo, I've mentioned him a couple of times now this week. Went into the week not really knowing anything about him. Coming out of the week, I'm definitely looking to find out as much as I possibly can. One of the things I learned through this week is that he spent 3 years playing off-ball linebacker at UCLA before transitioning to the edge this past year. And based off of how he performed this week in some of those one-on-one pass rush drills, he seems to be growing into that edge rusher position at an exponential rate. And, everybody's looking for the next Micah Parsons. And I'm not saying Oladejo is going to be that guy, but he checks a lot of the boxes that people, saw with Micah Parsons, that off-ball linebacker turned edge rusher and whatnot. That seems to be sort of having a preternatural, I don't even know what that word means, but it sounds good, right? Preternatural ability to rush the quarterback. And so, he won this week. I saw him win with cross chop, a bull rush, right? They moved him inside, he won. They moved him outside, he won. You even saw him, locking down guys in that coverage drill as an off-ball linebacker. And so considering that this man has been an edge rusher for only 4 months and has already showing a varied pass rush plan and executing a varied pass rush plan in terms of how he wins, that is extremely impressive. So no shade to Mike Green, who deserves all the shine that he's going to get this week, but some of these other guys deserve shine, and we will talk about even more guys not just at the edge rusher position, but on the interior that deserve shine as winners this week as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So if you want to continue going strong in the year of 2025, like so many of these Senior Bowl standouts, one way that you can have more fun, like, an Olawufemi Oladejo, is by going to more live events. And whether you're looking to get into sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Game Time is going to make it easier to get tickets to those events thanks to their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature is going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And if you toggle Game Time's all-in pricing in the app, you'll get the total cost up front and don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. And we love the panoramic seat views at Game Time, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. So if you want to take advantage of these great features, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So when we look at the interior defensive line, there isn't as much pressure with the Falcons like it is with the edge rusher position to invest in interior defensive linemen, D tackles, as they were formerly called, formerly known as D tackles, in this year's draft, right? Because of the investments that they made in last year's draft. You had Rook Aurora, you had Brandon Dorless, you also have Zach Harrison, where, who was arguably the team's most reliable 3-4 defensive end in their defense this past year. And then if you're assuming, like I am currently assuming, that the Falcons will maintain that 3-4 front despite hiring Jeff Ulbrich as their new defensive coordinator, then you feel like you're pretty much set at that D tackle position to the point that you don't necessarily have to invest that. But, that doesn't mean that we can't still talk about some of the winners this week at the Senior Bowl, because as the late, great Kobe Bryant might say, job's not done. And so with the speculation from some folks that the Falcons could be parting ways with Grady Jarrett, their best interior pass rusher this past season, you can make the case that, while interior defensive line is maybe not the priority today, when you look at, this defense, 3 months from now, it could be a much bigger priority. Similar to, I remember, several years ago when people around this time back in 2020 were debating the difference between AJ Epinesa and K'Lavon Chaisson for the Falcons pick at, I think, 16 that year in 2020. And then when people were talking about the Falcons taking a corner, like, we don't need a corner. We have Desmond Trufant and Isaiah Oliver. That aged particularly well, and they wind up cutting Desmond Trufant at the beginning of the offseason, and all of a sudden cornerback becomes a huge need that it doesn't necessarily look at. And so you could see a similar dynamic. So, next week we'll be breaking down all the different defensive line positions here on Locked On Falcons like we did last week on the offensive line. So we'll get further into the current situation in Atlanta, but let's talk about, a potential Grady Jarrett replacement, because my first winner of Senior Bowl week kind of fits that bill. If you're looking for a Grady Jarrett replacement, a Grady Jarrett heir apparent, Walter Nolen out of Ole Miss was, to me, the best interior defensive line pass rusher all week long. I think that was expected going into the week, and I think he delivered on that. He's number 26 on Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. So again, if we're stacking him similar as a prospect as Mike Green or Donovan Ezeiruaku, if they're in the mix at 15, then why not Walter Nolen? So Nolen showed all week long the thing that he showed all throughout this past season in the SEC, which is excellent burst, power, and is just a natural 3-tech. Another interior defensive lineman that looks like a natural 3-tech is Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I thought he was relatively quiet on the first day of practice, but he really stepped it up a notch on the second day, and from what I've heard, continued that on the third day. He was winning on day 2 with clubs and swims and showing active hands and power and burst and all these various things. And so Alexander, like Mike Green, had a lot to prove this week coming from Toledo. He was very productive in the MAC over these last 2 years, one of the more productive interior defensive linemen in the past 2 years, based off of like pressures and pressure rate and all that, and win percentage and all that stuff these past 2 years. But would it translate against premium competition? And the answer I got this week was yes, it did in the Senior Bowl practice. And it's not just the interior guys that can create pressure at the quarterback position. The Falcons could absolutely use some more size in the middle of their defensive line. Eddie Goldman is a free agent. Zion Logue, who they drafted seemingly to be that heir apparent, that long-term option at that nose tackle position in round 7 of last year, is now with the Buffalo Bills. And there's a big hole at that nose tackle position. Again, if the Falcons continue to stick with this 3-4 base defense, they need a player at that position. And if you're looking to add a guy that can be that black hole in the middle of your defense, well, one of my winners of the week was Cam Jackson of Florida, another guy that I hadn't really got a chance to watch going into the week. But, I thought in practices looked like a good run stuffer, and you compare him with Oregon nose tackle Jamari Caldwell, who had a good week as well. Unlike Caldwell, who struggled to kind of stay on his feet and keep his balance, I thought Jackson did an excellent job of that. And while he's not necessarily a guy that I think is going to make a ton of noise as a pass rusher in the NFL, I thought he won more than his fair share of one-on-ones, showcasing that power, that size, that length that he possesses in abundance. And so I'm looking forward to circling back and doing a deeper dive on his film. And I don't say this to put down Deion Walker, the big deep tackle from Kentucky, but due to Deion Walker being, over 6'7", 340 pounds, having 34, almost 36-inch arms, 84.5-inch wingspan. But because of that height, Deion Walker typically struggles with high pad level. And that, to me, makes him less effective being more of that nose tackle and being more effective playing, closer to the tackle, playing more of a D end in the 3-4 defense. But Jackson is a similarly sized player. And from what I've seen, and again, I haven't done a deep dive on the film, I don't think he has the same struggles with pad level. That even though he's 6'6.5", 339 pounds, 34 plus inch arms, 83.25 inch wingspan. So similar size as Walker, not quite as big as Walker, but very big, a very large human being. He seems to play with a little bit better pad level, so seems to be a little bit better suited to being that nose tackle. And those dimensions for Cameron Jackson are nearly identical to the dimensions of Jordan Davis when he was coming out. And, you're seeing what Jordan Davis has grown into over this past month for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm not saying that Cameron Jackson is the same as Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis is an alien when it comes to the athleticism relative to his size. But Cam Jackson does move particularly well for a big man. And so if you're looking at the Eagles front envious, right, not just because you're looking at Jalen Carter, but also because you're looking at Jordan Davis, maybe Cam Jackson can scratch that Jordan Davis size itch for you and whatnot. So he is definitely a winner for me. But, because we were so focused on these pass rushers, these defensive linemen, our eyes are also noticing, which blockers are actually, effectively blocking those guys. Who are the guys that are actually shutting those guys all week long? And so we're going to talk about some of my winners on the offensive line as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So the big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports with over 10 million active members and billions in winnings. I said billions, guys. Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action, and here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes just needs 1 yard passing in order for you to win. And if you can couple that with another correct pick, you're cashing out. And so you can do that and if you think Saquon Barkley is going to score a touchdown in this game, you pick more on his 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdown projection, and boom, you've already won. That's how easy it is. So download the Praise Pick app today to take advantage of this easy offer and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So, while the offensive line doesn't look like as much of a pressing issue, I do feel like the Falcons do have needs along their offensive line. Now, again, they're not as pressing as other areas of their roster, but, drafting a developmental offensive tackle, heir apparent successor to Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry, who are both on the wrong side of 30, should be considered a need, not a want, if you ask me. You have Storm Norton, the team's current swing tackle, and he's headed to free agency. He's also on the wrong side of 30. So to me, it's a need for the Falcons to get much younger and better at this offensive tackle position. And I'd also argue that there is the potential vulnerability of opening up a big hole at the center position as well, with Drew Dolman heading to free agency. Now, I personally expect Dolman back in Atlanta in 2025, but I know others of you are less optimistic, particularly after a Jeremy Fowler of ESPN report earlier this week, I believe on Wednesday, talking about, Dolman potentially casting out. And again, it's not even February at this stage in time, but, no doubt when we get to March, we'll have a lot more information on where Drew Dolman is headed and whatnot. And so while I feel optimistic today, maybe I won't be as optimistic a month from now. So we'll see on that front. But as I mentioned before, especially on day 2, I think the offensive line collectively outperformed the pass rushers in the one-on-ones. And we know in this setting at the Senior Bowl that it's sort of stacked in the favor of the defensive linemen to win the majority of those reps. And the fact that the offensive line, to me, at least to my eyes, won the majority of those reps, that to me is impressive. And sort of whittling down the list of winners for the offensive line, that basically tells me that the entire offensive line were the winners of the week based off of that. But, sort of focusing on a handful of guys, people that could be those options at the offensive tackle position. Anthony Belton of NC State, right? I've talked about him before, but I'll mention him again. I'm not sure he lost a single rep in one-on-ones in the first 2 days of practice, right? Although I did hear that David Walker did get the better of him a couple of times on day 3. But, I saw Mike Green, I saw Donovan Ezeiruaku try to hit him with some spin moves, and he shut both of those down. He played both tackle and guard on the first 2 days. He locked down guys at both positions. I know Brandon Thorne of Bleacher Report had him with a 5th-round grade based off of the film that he saw. So you look at Belton as potentially a middle round guy, but could he be moving up the boards based off of the week he has? I know one of the concerns that Brandon Thorne had was concerns about his technique. And, maybe that leads to teams looking at, those handful of reps that he had playing guard this week and being like, okay, well, some of those issues could get exposed as a tackle. Maybe we should kick him inside at guard, and that may help boost his stock. So we'll see on that. But, based off of the buzz, Belton entered the week sort of being seen as a project. I don't think he's exiting the week where teams are like, oh, he's no longer a project. He's a plug-and-play starter at this point in time. But, I don't know if he changed the narrative in that regard, but, I feel like teams are going to be much more willing to take on that project based off of what he was able to do this week. So that's why Anthony Belton to me is a winner, and he makes sense for the Falcons. As I've mentioned before, he comes from NC State. NC State runs a scheme that features a healthy dose of outside zone. From what I understand, I know not nearly to the degree that they featured it when Dwayne Ledford, the Falcons' current offensive line coach, was the position coach there at NC State, I think 8 years ago or whatnot, but there were still remnants of that scheme. And so Anthony Belton could be a guy that could fit this outside zone scheme and also bring a little bit more size and physicality at like 335 pounds to diversify the run game that we've been talking about so much over the last, couple of months here on the podcast. But another tackle that really impressed me this weekend as a winner for me is Carson Vincent of Alabama A&M. He was another guy that rarely lost reps in his one-on-ones and pass protection, another small school guy looking to prove himself versus the higher level competition. And I think absolutely did so. He's another guy that Brandon Thorne ranked in the 5th round or graded as a 5th round player in his write-up for him on Bleacher Report. So another guy that could be one of those developmental tackles where the Falcons have a 4th round pick. And that's a classic area of the draft, 3rd, 4th round. You take a backup tackle, right? Because if you want to plug and play starter at the tackle position, typically that means 1st, 2nd round. 3rd, 4th round usually means a guy that's going to come in year 1, be a swing tackle, provide some depth, but with the expectation, if he can develop, be a starter down the road. And I think that's kind of where my eye is for some of these potential offensive tackle options for the Falcons, where they have a 4th round pick and whatnot. Maybe they'll get some more picks in the middle rounds. No 3rd, no 5th currently, but maybe they'll get those by the time we get to the end of April when the draft rolls around. But Carson Vincent certainly is a guy that impressed me all week long and showed that he belonged at this upper level of competition despite coming from Alabama A&M. And on the interior, Grey Zabel of North Dakota State. I'm sure he's not the first. You're not, maybe this is the first time you're hearing about Grey Zabel because, I don't know, you haven't been following along the Senior Bowl, talk all week long on the winners and losers and the risers and the fallers and all those various things, and you just decide, you know what, I'm just going to wait to the end of the week and make Aaron Freeman my first listen when it comes to the Senior Bowl, and I appreciate you. Thank you for giving me that responsibility. But Grey Zabel, everybody's been buzzing about Grey Zabel. It seems like an annual tradition where a North Dakota State offensive lineman comes to Senior Bowl in Mobile and shines bright. You may recall my first Senior Bowl that I attended 2 years ago. That guy was Cody Mauch, who was a second-round pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was a big fan of Cody Mauch, and I'm becoming a big fan of Grey Zabel at this stage in time. And part of me remembers, and again, maybe I'm just making up this memory, but part of me remembers watching Cody Mauch, at North Dakota State 2 years ago, and being like, who's that right tackle? And apparently that was Grey Zabel as a guy. And so that there's like a fleeting memory of me being like, there's another guy on this North Dakota State offensive line that I need to keep an eye on. And I think that was Grey Zabel. But, he spent the most of his career at North Dakota State playing offensive tackle, but he did get opportunities playing inside at guard, starting games at both guard spots. I think he did play a handful of snaps at center, although I don't know if he started a game at center. But he got a lot of work this week in Mobile at center, at both guard spots, and was locking down guys, right? Grey Zabel showed, his ability to handle speed and power, right, with his clean technique, his strong footwork all week long. And I remember with Cody Mauch, who I was a big fan of, he was a little light in the pants. Like when guys wanted to go through him, they were successfully able to do that. And I didn't see that be a major issue for Grey Zabel this week, which is, to me, a huge part of, and especially when you're talking about, potentially moving on from Drew Dalman, potentially upgrading from Drew Dalman. Right. North Dakota State also, again, haven't studied their offense as of late, but certainly when Cody Mauch was there and Trey Lance were there, they were very much a heavy outside zone run scheme. And so he's a player that has that experience to play in the scheme that the Falcons have. And unlike Drew Dalman, who's, a little lighter guy, Grey Zabel's a bigger guy. Like, I think it's like 6'6", 315, if I'm not mistaken. Forget what his official measurements were at the Senior Bowl, but something along those lines. And so he showed, even if he doesn't necessarily have the experience or at least a long time experience playing the center position, he showed that he could perform at that position all week long. So certainly a guy that's on my radar that if the Falcons want to, take advantage and add another center, Grey Zabel fits. And especially in this year's draft class, where it doesn't feel like there's a clear-cut OC1, as they say, I think Grey Zabel emerges from this week as a winner because he may be that guy that will be penciled in that spot alongside guys like Jonah Monheim of USC, Jared Wilson of Georgia, as well as so many other players. So that we'll have to see on that front. But those are my winners. Again, there are probably so many players that I could wax poetic about and what I thought of them. And of course, if you want to get insights into a specific player, hit me up. And you can do so via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. You can become a Locked On Falcons insider at the link in the description below. It is 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month. At that point, you'll also get access to the film breakdowns that I have done for some of these Senior Bowl prospects, looking at Mike Green, looking at Donovan Ezeiruaku, looking at Walter Nolen, as well as others, in the lead up to this week of practices. And we'll probably be looking at some of these guys that are winners, as this process goes on. So we'll be looking at even more pass rushers, potentially more offensive linemen, all that stuff as a Locked On Falcons insider. So you can get access to that at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. But of course, it's a great place to just basically say, hey, Aaron, what are your thoughts on this guy? Now, again, if you're going to start asking me about, skill players and other positions outside of the trenches, I probably won't have strong opinions about those guys, but you're more than welcome to ask anyway and find out, F around and find out, as they say. But there you guys have it. There's my week in Mobile. I appreciate everybody, with their patience with me to, I know some of you guys are like, what about the tight ends or whatever, but it's like, we don't care about that stuff here on Locked On Falcons, at least not this week. Maybe we'll care about that later in the offseason if and when a certain player gets traded at the position. So maybe that will be something we'll revisit and circle back. But I appreciate all of you guys hanging out with me all week long. I enjoyed it. I always enjoy going to the Senior Bowl. Even though I feel like the Senior Bowl is a little bit overrated in the sense of how much it impacts draft stock, where, to me, like if 80% of a player's evaluation is the film stuff, and then like 10% of the remaining is probably what they do in the interviews and meeting with teams and whatnot, the Senior Bowl, out of, the combine and pro days and all these other events that occur between the end of the season and the draft, you probably do the math. The Senior Bowl is maybe like 2 to 5% of the thing. And so I think, far too often we'll sit here and be like, this guy had a great week, and boom, the next mock draft that comes out is going to have that guy as a top 15 pick. I remember this happened many years ago with Braxton Miller, the former Ohio State quarterback, after a great week of the Senior Bowl, and it was wild stuff. But Malik Willis came out of his Senior Bowl being projected as a top 5, top 2 pick, right? And he went in the 3rd round. And so that's what I mean, where I feel like the Senior Bowl is overrated, but I do enjoy the Senior Bowl every single week, even though I think it gets a little bit overrated and over-exaggerated on how much it impacts draft stock. I do think it is an important piece of the evaluation for these players, and that's why I continue to spend as much money as I do each and every year to attend this, in addition to interacting with, great people, Jarvis Davis, Trayshawn Diaz, Kevin Knight, as well as interacting and meeting other people, bumping into Ian Rappaport, spilling drinks on Tom Pelissero, all that various stuff, seeing Thomas Dimitroff in the bar and going like, oh, well, what's up with that guy? Talking trash to Dave Canales. Okay, I didn't do any of that stuff. But these were all the things that I did in my head as I just sat there sipping on my cocktail at these bars in Mobile. But it's always great. I think the networking aspect of it, meeting people, hanging out with friends that you just basically interact with, either on the podcast or on the internet, on Twitter or whatever else, for most of the year, just, seeing people in the flesh. That's really what the Senior Bowl is about. Like, I remember last year seeing Jeff Ulbrich, out and about and standing shoulder to shoulder with him. My assessment of Jeff Ulbrich is different now, because before I was very critical of Jeff Ulbrich during his time in Atlanta, from his time as a linebackers coach, and being like, get on my phone and be like, he didn't develop Devondre Campbell right. He's not as good as coaches people make him out to be. But now, sort of, being in a restaurant, seeing, eating some fried seafood, watching Jeff Ulbrich a table over eating fried seafood, you're just like, okay, that's just a dude. And while I may not necessarily change my opinion about him as a coach, it does make me understand that, at the end of the day, this is just a people business, and these are people other than the same. And so that, to me, is the true value of the Senior Bowl, of just understanding that, some of these people that are just kind of entities to you are actually people. So that's why, even though I think the Senior Bowl can be a little bit overrated when it comes to the draft stuff, it still is, to me, a worthwhile event to attend. So hopefully, some of you guys listening are on the fence potentially about attending the Senior Bowl, in future years, and want to attend. Maybe that's enough for you to, get off the couch and head on down to Mobile next year, and we can hang out and eat delicious fried oysters or something like that next year. So look forward to more draft conversations. We'll be talking more defense, looking back at the 2024 season, breaking down these various positions next week on the podcast, guys. So appreciate it. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to get more scoops on the, who won, who lost this Senior Bowl week, check out Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL Scouting, and of course, Locked On NFL is going to have you covered, getting you geared up for the big game next week. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.